Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leon Gorin, CEO of PEO Leadership, and I'd like to welcome all our members, alumni, and special guests to this very special in-person Eye of the Executive event focused on the future of work, how to build high-performing and engaged teams in turbulent times. A couple of months back, I sat in a few of our advisory board and asked our members the number one issue on the top of their mind. Certainly, we heard about inflation, we heard about supply chain logistics, we heard about interest rates, but the number one issue that they wanted to hear about and learn more about was in respect to their people. Our leaders were worried about finding the right people to work in their organizations. They were worried about rising wages, and they were worried about retention of their best people, if not all their people today. If you were reading the national paper today, there were a number of articles written about the upcoming layoffs that many industries are beginning to consider and have already started to implement. This new world of ours is not sitting still. It's changing at an incredible pace. So with that in mind, as you listen to our speaker today, don't only think about where you and your organization are sitting today. Think about where you and your organization will be 6 months from today in respect to your people. I'm going to introduce our special guest today. Rich Skippon is a partner at EY and leads the workforce advisory practice in Canada. Over his 25-year career, he has held HR leadership roles in both industry and professional service organizations. As part of his practice at EY, he supports clients in achieving business outcomes through effective alignment of their organizations and people. Their key areas of focus include the evolution of talent in response to digital transformation, change management, culture, human resource strategy, and organization structure design. Rich, it's great to have you with us today. We look forward to your presentation.
So we'll spend a little bit of time unpacking a survey that we've been running over the last, I guess, 2 years since the pandemic started, and just give you some fact base around that, and then talk a little bit about kind of our point of view about how to deal with some of the trends and issues that are coming out of that, and then I'm happy to take questions as we go through this, because I think as you see the trends, it obviously, I think, resonates in many cases and raises questions. So happy to stop and do that and have an interactive discussion. Maybe just to start, I think it's important just to recognize, and Leon said this in his setup in terms of change, what was true 3 months ago isn't necessarily true today. And so we captured a few of the things that are starting to change and that are affecting how we think about work and talent. So in terms of, I think if you don't know about inflation right now, then you have been enjoying a vacation on a tropical island. So this is like being inundated. We're getting inundated with this daily. And obviously that's a factor for wages. It's a factor for how we price our products to our customers. And it's a reality in terms of kind of every aspect of our life right now, whether that's as business leaders or as consumers. And so that obviously is a major impact and something that will impact our labor cost. From a skills perspective, and I can't think of an industry that hasn't struggled right now with shortages of talent. So at one point in 2010, employers were reporting, kind of 30% of them, 31% of them said they had challenges finding people. It's now 69%. And the interesting thing about that, and again, Leon mentioned it, it's not just executive talent. It's right down to the shop floor, like getting people to work in factories or to build houses, whatever the industry. There's a real shortage, and that's driving a huge focus on talent and a huge impact on our ability to be successful as businesses. I don't think it's sort of, when we were talking about future work, probably pre-pandemic, there was a lot of talk of demographics, and it's always kind of an interesting topic that kind of comes and goes. It has sort of faded from the limelight right now, but I would say this is one not to lose track of, because we have a huge amount of turnover in the workforce, people leaving the workforce as it ages, and that's something that all of us, as we think about already having a talent challenge, it continues to be a major issue in terms of shortages. Technology is another major driver. We had focus on digital again pre-pandemic. The move to remote work has massively accelerated that. Organizations are putting much more emphasis on the need for IT skills, and areas like artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, the move to cloud computing. All of these things are driving a huge need for tech talent. And then finally, ESG is obviously emerging as a topic. Not clear exactly yet how much impact that's going to have in terms of organizations, but I know for us, in terms of thinking through kind of what we offer to our clients, we're developing offerings around operating model, how do you measure it on the accounting side, how do you measure your ESG and report it and so on. So that's another kind of major macro trend. So that's sort of the broader environment. Just very quickly, so I mentioned the surveys. So we've continued to do these throughout the pandemic with different kinds of focuses. Some have been just employees, some employers. The most recent one that we'll talk about now that we just completed looked at both employee and employer perspectives. The research started really around work reimagined, return to work, all those kinds of studies. As consultants, as soon as like the market collapsed, we were busy trying to think of like, what the heck are we going to talk about? So we spent a lot of time, which you probably all got inundated with, what is the future of work? How do we return to work? We started talking about return to work in 2020, which was like massively too early because everybody is still thinking about it. But the survey has kind of evolved in its trends as we go. As it's gone, and we'll spend time on work reimagined as well as kind of evolving themes around talent and fluidity of talent. So I'm going to structure this in terms of the findings, and then we'll talk, as I said before, a little bit about trends or what we might do about it. So. In case I don't look that old, I'm very old in attitude. So when I think about remote work, when I see stats like this, it disheartens me because I like everybody to be in the office and be able to put my eyeballs on them. Not because I don't trust them, just because I get energy from having people around. And sadly, people don't agree with me. So we have in this, and the other bald South African who was going to be presenting, he lives out in Oakville, so he likes these trends. I happen to live in Cabbagetown. The fact is that most employees, a majority of employees want flexibility. In this case, it's 2+ days of work remotely, and as you get into some of the really hot places for talent like IT and tech, where we're really struggling to get people, it's even higher. Now that industry's led in terms of having hybrid and remote work, but it's high. And in terms of sort of the impact on that, a lot of organizations, and we'll talk about it in a minute, are really kind of struggling with what's the right answer. And I think because we're in a very employee-friendly market right now, probably over-rotating around sort of how much flexibility you offer. Culture is an interesting one, so I'm sure we'll have questions on culture. We spend a lot of time right now in the sort of client space dealing and talking about culture. Interestingly, people have seen, and employees have seen culture improve during the pandemic. I'm not sure if that's because they see less of their bosses, but they have generally seen improvement. We have seen improvements in culture, and I think some of that is flexibility. It's also because I think we've put more emphasis on trying to spend time with our employees and understand their situations and be more accommodating to deal with it, more empathetic. Everyone's tossing that word around like candy, but honestly, it is a sort of positive trend. I think as a leader, this one's a tricky one because I think it is hard, in my estimation, to really maintain culture easily if you never see anybody, right? If you don't actually physically see it. And I'm sure people in the room will disagree, but as I said, I'm an old soul. Just another kind of facts to kind of keep, just to sort of level set here. So in terms of DE&I, it's interesting because it's obviously been a very a big topic in the popular media and in all aspects of life. It has come through in the survey. And the interesting thing is employees think that there's a lot more to be done. And if you look at the employer side, they actually would agree with that. When you dig into this one a little bit more, though, it's quite interesting. It's actually based, most of the number that's driven there is based on wage equity. And that's actually when they talk about wanting to focus on equality in DE&I, a lot of it has to do with wage that's actually driving that number. A couple other things just related to turnover and connection to an organization. Trust is, I would say, middling. And one of the things that we have found relative to culture is that organizations that create an environment of trust, where they trust their leaders, where they trust their colleagues, tend to have environments that retain people more and are more connected. People are more connected to the organization. And so that's an area that's hard to deal with, but an important factor when you think about your talent and retaining them. And then the bottom one is just around employee experience, and employees aren't necessarily confident that the employee experience that they have is going to be sustained in the long run. So another kind of data point there. This one we touched on a little bit, but I think this is the question, right? Will this, what this teeter-totter is showing is kind of where the balance is relative to employees and employers. And right now, it is actually weighted more heavily towards the employee. We're competing for talent. We're being massively flexible for fear of losing talent. And I think the question is, as inflation bites, and we potentially have a slowing economy, I won't use the R word, but this balance, I think, will probably shift, and we'll see a little bit more sanity coming in the labor market in the next little bit. But this has, over the last little bit, been pretty heavily employee weighted. And on top of that, you see some of that in the stats here around sort of employee loyalty or interest in changing jobs. And so in this stat, it was 29% were considering moving jobs in the next 12 months, which is huge. Like, that's a massive. If people actually did that, that's massive, and that's versus 7% in 2021. So. Again, it's a very fluid workforce right now. In terms of kind of why people are leaving jobs, this is again another interesting one. So typically, people have in the past said they leave jobs for opportunity, for advancement, those kinds of things. In this case, it's money, and so typically money is like the what seals the deal, right? You got a great job offer, it looks awesome, and the money kind of makes it all work. As opposed to money being the reason that you're leaving, and the other stuff kind of comes secondary. So I hopefully that's transitory, but that's a tough one to deal with when we talk about how do we create a differentiated value proposition for our employees. If pay is the primary mechanism, it starts to reduce the levers that you as an employer can work with. And the other thing I guess I would say on this is, flexibility is pretty important with 16 and 24%. So our paranoia, our collective paranoia about needing to be flexible is probably not entirely wrong, given what we're seeing in the survey. The other thing that has happened, and there's been a lot of talk about it, but I think it's actually happening in a lot of industries, is organizations are getting much more creative and flexible around where people work. And so you can see it in this sort of circle at the bottom. 74% of organizations are exploring sort of geo-flexibility, and the way that kind of breaks out, you've got sort of what we call an office hub. So that's sort of a geography around your office. Some organizations are thinking about using different facilities to have people come into versus sort of the main office. And so that's kind of that 26%. The local is saying it's okay if we're based in Toronto, you can live in Victoria and work for us, and that's okay. Regional is anywhere in sort of North America, and then global is, as you would expect, everywhere. So there's a lot of, I would say there's a lot of complexity to making that work, but organizations in their sort of desperation to try and find people, maybe that's a strong word, but certainly in their hunt to try and find people are considering a lot of different options.
What I love about PEO Leadership right now is how well our members are supporting each other and rising to face the COVID-19 challenge.
Paul Zadorsky, Senior Vice President, Crayola International.
Business is all about being able to rapidly adapt to change, but how do you learn as fast as the world changes?
PEO Leadership lets you tap into the collective wisdom of some of Canada's top executives.
Having that peer group and broader leadership community to lean on, it makes all the difference.
The time to step up and lead is now. Go to peo-leadership.com.
Question on that last chart where you showed the circle.
Yeah.
How are firms finding working with extreme time zone changes. Like we run across 11 time zones.
Yeah.
Very challenging.
Yeah.
We've got an operation over Qatar 8 hours ahead of us. So trying to reorient and run business over there, it's challenging. So, it wouldn't be a preference for us to set up businesses and have employees that far away because it makes it challenging. I don't know if there's any sort of stats on how that's working.
Yeah, I don't have stats, but I will say it's India's kind of been one of the big outsourcing locations for a long time, and it works in some instances where you can kind of pass work discreetly over to a different time zone.
Pass work as opposed to.
It is, and the interesting thing on that one is, we call it Global Delivery Services or whatever is our organization, and the biggest challenge we have there, like they're not unique challenges in terms of talent there. It's not like in India everybody has no inflation and isn't changing jobs. Right. They're actually looking for meaningful work, and so the model's actually getting quite challenged in that aspect because we're trying to toss stuff over the fence and they're kind of tossing it back and saying, I want to do what you're doing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But I would say that the time difference is a real challenge, and it works when you can sort of segregate work into components where you can break it up and kind of deal with, you do this overnight and we'll pick it up in the morning, where you get those complete sort of opposites. Yeah.
I've heard a number of stories of people getting caught during the pandemic going down to the U.S., a nicer climate to do work, all of a sudden realizing that technically from a tax perspective, you can't do that. So what have you guys seen or advised, or as you kind of go with this, is that the mistake that's being commonly made about where you have to declare your income if you're working?
Yeah, so this is not my area of practice, but some of my colleagues deal with it, and it's a huge issue. So, for instance, if you take our firm as a partnership, if I go and work in another country, I expose the Canadian firm, the entire Canadian firm, to taxes in that geography. So never mind me personally, but like the whole, yeah. So it's like, people are like, oh, I want to go work in India. I'm like, yeah, India's going to make us all pay tax there. So that's, that's a partnership thing. But it is a huge issue. So us as a firm, because we do provide tax advice and ideally want to follow the advice that we give, it's a little contradictory if we don't, have really locked down a lot of that kind of remote working from anywhere kind of approach, because it's a huge issue. And depending on the state in the U.S., right, it can be, you can be there a day and you owe tax, or you can be there a month and you don't have to. This is some of what actually we're just talking about now here. There is the question is, is work from anywhere going to be a silver bullet here? And I think for it to be a silver bullet, there's a few things that actually have to kind of come together to make it work. The first is an obvious one, is business fit, right? So you've got, Elon Musk is always great. Like, he's always got a outrageous thing to like quote on. So of course he's basically said in the last few weeks, get your ass to the factory or like you're done. And that's, in some ways, when you think about the industry, people are making cars in factories. The majority of the workforce needs to be there. The business fit is not there for remote work necessarily. And it made me laugh in some of the, anyway, I'm sure I'll insult someone here because it's not just retail, but I do know, like, one of my clients is a grocer, and they spent a lot of time talking about return to work and what should we do and blah blah. And when you think about it, 150,000 of their employees are out in stores like selling stuff every day, and 2,000 people in head office are fussing about like, what should we do? Should we work at home or not? Anyway, so you have to. You have to think about business fit for sure. The other piece is talent fit. So going to a work anywhere kind of approach is only helpful if it's going to give you access to talent that wasn't there before. So being thoughtful about, and we'll talk about it a little bit from a workforce planning perspective, but understanding kind of where talent is and how to access it is really important before you just kind of say, hey, go work anywhere, because it doesn't necessarily buy you anything. And then the last piece is kind of the culture piece, and the, how do you consider the ability of people to interact? What is the importance of having face-to-face meetings with people, and so on? And so that's kind of the sort of last component. So those are all things to consider. And I would say when we think about companies that kind of implement this, I guess I would start by saying it is really a strategic choice that's not a one to be taken lightly, because there's a lot of ramifications for that. The tax one is one example. There's obviously the connecting with your employees is an issue. Some of these other pieces that need to fall into place kind of are impacting that. So like there's one of the banks is looking at setting up a different sort of global entity, as he steps well outside his area of knowledge here, but setting up a global kind of entity so that they can source talent everywhere to deal with some of the legal and tax issues, right? But that's a major operating model kind of decision that you need to make in order to make this work. So again, pretty big implications. Getting the equality of experience is a huge one. I'm sure a lot of you have thought about that. So you've got people who are working remote, people who come into the office. How do you create some equality so that people who are working at home aren't missing out on mentorship, aren't missing out on job opportunities, and so on. So thinking through that. Sort of skills of our leaders is another thing that's been pretty pressed when we think about virtually working, because managing a virtual team is a very different thing than managing a team that's face-to-face, whether that's, as I said, mentorship or performance management or just getting day-to-day work done. Leaders need to think in a very different kind of more global mindset, more diverse kind of approach to how they lead teams and so on. And then the last thing is, this is a more, I'd say, kind of cleanliness sort of thing, but figuring out what your approach is for virtualization. Like, can you show up in your hoodie and unshaven on the call or not? Literally had that conversation with partners. Anyway, so getting some agreement on how we behave remotely. So anyway, there's a lot of components to make it work, and it is a pretty important strategic decision when you go into it. So the other thing, I guess, when you think about talent, and we'll geek out from an HR perspective for a little bit, so hopefully we have some HR people who like geeking out. But some of figuring out how we deal with the talent is really getting very clear on what it is we need and where. And so one of the things that we really have been working a lot with our clients right now on is around our strategic workforce plan. And when we think about that as a model, we think about it in terms of what is the capability that you need, like what kind of skills, competencies, et cetera, what capabilities you need in your organization. How much of that do you need? What's the optimal composition? Is it all employees, or is it contractors, or is it short-term gig economy kind of workers? And what's the cost? And then on top of that, what does it mean for people's careers? What do people want out of this, and what's the culture that you're trying to achieve? So that's kind of, when we think about the mix of labor, those are the kind of things we look at. And then it's super important to kind of do two things. We often kind of focus on the internal availability of resources, which is kind of, we added 360 together twice. I'm in a people practice, hopefully that's the right number. But anyway, if you add those together, the 720 view is basically looking internally at who's coming in, who's moving laterally in the organization, who's moving up and who's moving out, to get a sense of like what does our talent profile look like. But equally important is looking at the external environment, and that goes back to that location point I made earlier. Where is talent located? How much does it cost? What capabilities are we getting from that talent? Again, and I promise it'll be the last bank example I use, but one of the banks. So a number of you, I'm sure, are struggling with tech talent as being one of the kind of really important things that you can't get access to. One of them is setting up basically tech talent hubs in different places in North America that give them access to the talent they need, so they've made sure it's there, and that at a cost that makes sense for them in terms of what's affordable. So I think the understanding the external market as you think about your talent strategy is super important. And then the other thing, when you get into something like workforce planning, it can be a painful exercise, and so people do it once and then they leave it. And the challenge is it gets, like we're talking here on how fast things are moving, it's stale dated very fast. And so staying on top of how your workforce is evolving and understanding how your talent needs are evolving and looking at that on a rolling kind of forecast basis is super important to be able to make sure that you've got talent where you need it. And in forward-looking, with enough of a forward-looking perspective. So maybe the last thing I would say, just on that sort of rolling forecast, I think what is the tricky situation, and Leon said at the beginning, tell me what's going to happen in 6 months. I'm not signing up for that. But anyway, what I would say is being thoughtful as the business slows about the type of talent that you want to retain. Is it IT talent that is super hard to find? So if I have to make choices on where I'm reducing and where I'm going to continue to press, being really thoughtful about what it is that drives, not to state the obvious, but drives your business, and making sure that you protect that. So again, to pick on the tech talent piece, it's very hard to find that talent, and then if you let it go or get rid of it, it's very hard to get it back, and it starts to push you behind. So that's one example, but thinking through kind of what is the talent we're going to need in the longer term through whatever the economic cycle is important. Right, so this is a good consulting slide. But let me steep you in some theory for a second, and then you can tell me I'm full of it. But one of the things we've done actually internally as an organization is really start to understand what we call kind of career architecture. And the point of doing that is to understand the skills that exist across different roles, so that we can actually start to move talent seamlessly across the organization. So one of the things that, we're like every business, we've got kind of offerings that are very different. We've got an audit business, which I'm not in case I need to say that. There's audit, there's consulting, there's tax, there's transactions, and there's sort of a built-in view that each of those disciplines is very different, and we can't trade people across it. And so what we've done is we've actually gone in and decomposed the skills that sit in the roles in those different offerings, and found that in most cases, you can actually move people very seamlessly across those. And so what that does is it unlocks the ability to move talent within the organization at a level that we previously wouldn't have been able to do. And so again, in the context of scarcity, thinking about things like this in terms of how we create mobility in the organization is important. And then it also is important when we think about it from the career opportunities that people are looking for. People want different experiences. If we can offer that within the enterprise, that's infinitely more helpful to us than them going somewhere else to get it. So anyway, eye candy chart, but that's kind of what that was meant to do. And this one basically looks at what is the business capabilities we need, and then kind of walks through a decomposition down to the role level. Maybe a little bit on succession planning. So succession planning is not a particularly sexy topic, but it is super important to think through, and now more than ever. I think as it says here, the success of executives that are internal is way faster and better than bringing someone in from the outside. And I think that there's a number of kind of things that lead to pitfalls in succession management. I guess I would just say that thinking about a sort of very clear process around this, making sure you've got good data to inform the discussion. So not just performance data, but also data on potential. That's actually more important here. Understanding skills and capabilities, et cetera, is really critical to making sure that that you've got a proper succession plan in place. And the other thing I guess I'd just say on this is that organizations have moved beyond just kind of your C-level and thinking about that from a succession perspective, and starting to drive it deeper into the organization, so you have a bigger view of your talent. Last slide, and then we can take some questions. So obviously the question on rewards is an important one, and we started with the stat on how important the financial component of this is. But equally, in an environment where I do think you're at it sort of becomes a fool's errand trying to match salary all the time. It's escalating at a rate that's just not manageable. Thinking about the other components of your offer, whether you call that employee value proposition or whatever, is important. And so thinking about, yes, financial, it's got to be competitive, but also thinking about what can I do relative to physical environment, and where my people work, and what's the environment like that they're actually working in. Thinking about sort of the social aspect, so how do they connect with colleagues at work? Is there something compelling there that you can put into a proposition for employees, and then how do we support them in terms of whether that's just broader well-being or employee assistance, et cetera. All these components really need to be thought through at this point. We always go to the financial, but really balancing the discussion across all of those, and then being able to articulate that not only to your employees, but also to people that you're looking to hire is super important. Oftentimes employees don't. They focus strictly on the financial piece, and helping them understand kind of the completeness of what they're getting at the organization is important. And certainly when you're trying to attract people, thinking about all those components together is really key. So, in summary, so I think the war of talent's going to continue, and I think it's evolving, as we've said, and being on top of that and making sure that you've got a strategic workforce plan, so you understand how this is going to evolve for you as an organization. What are the key accountabilities? Key roles that you need to have filled. Leveraging your internal career marketplace, like I talked about with my eye candy chart. Succession planning, making sure that you've got a stable pipeline of talent is super important. And then, getting the right balance in terms of flexibility and hybrid work, and what works for your business, what works for your employees. Considering maybe talent from different geographies if you can make that work. And at the end of the day, thinking about the package so that it is compelling, not just from a financial perspective, but also holistically.
Aird & Burles is a prominent Canadian law firm with a well-established local, national and international practice. We provide strategic advice in all principal areas of business law. Regardless of size or sector, our professionals are dedicated to providing exceptional client service. Let us focus on your legal issues, so you can focus on your business. Contact Tony Joya or Bill Chalmers to discuss ways we can work together. Please visit airdburles.com for contact information.
Yeah, Rich, can you talk just a little bit about the skills that you believe leaders will require in the workplace of tomorrow?
Yeah, and we have like we came up with this, I think we called it digital leadership capability or competency model, which I'll remember like 10% of. But it's a lot of, so you have your sort of standard competencies around communication and so on. But really what we're starting to see becoming more important is around empathy and connecting with your employees, being able to manage really diverse teams across different geographies and with a much higher kind of DE&I capability. Some base kind of appreciation for technology and kind of how that integrates with roles and how you use that to connect with your people. Those were some of the kind of key ones, but it's definitely a more complex sort of management requirement now than it used to be. And I was just talking to one of my partners today, and she's like, "I don't want to hear about empathy anymore. I'm like busy enough trying to survive. How am I supposed to get in the pit with someone else and feel like face to face with what they're dealing with?" But that is one of the things that employees are looking for, is really truly understanding what they're going through at the same time. So those are a couple, and I'll look up the other ones, but those are the main ones that we're seeing. Yeah.
What do you see as the future around talent? Because obviously that's going to become more and more important. You didn't really talk about that in your presentation.
About the ESG perspective. Yeah. I don't know that we've seen it kind of showing up in talent yet, but more so from I'd say organizations are kind of at a point right now, they're just trying to figure out how to create programs around it and awareness around it. I mean, in terms of sort of roles, we're seeing some chief sustainability officers and those kinds of roles starting to take root. And I suspect those will be transitory in terms of their how long. Sort of like the chief digital officer was a big thing for a while, and so it's good. It gives organizations focus on gives organizations focus on that capability and building it out. The other thing I guess I would say on the, you kind of bucket into the social side. There's been a lot of focus on DE&I, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. We do a lot of work on culture, but a lot of it has that flavor to it. Help us understand what is our culture of inclusiveness, how do we increase that, what kind of development do we need to give our people, what are we doing behaviorally that's undermining it. So I think that's definitely linked to the S, and I think probably the S is the biggest place where we've seen people focus, probably a little bit less on the other two. The governance piece is coming, and as I mentioned, like some of our audit practice focuses on helping to like companies demonstrate sort of how they're governing and how they're, what they're doing is actually, environmentally sustainable and so on. But yeah, that's probably, if I broadly talk about the S, I think that's probably where we're seeing it from a talent perspective, less from a skills and capabilities, but more like how do you create a different culture and environment in your organization that's consistent with that.
Any idea on what your kind of percentages around money being the big driver?
Yeah.
In the next 24 months, do you see that? What percentage change?
Yeah.
If you had a crystal ball.
If I had a crystal ball, yeah, I mean, I suspect it's going to, it's an interesting question because we've got inflation there, right? And that is driving a big focus on wages right now. I do think, if we can get that under control and the froth comes out of the talent market a little bit, I think it'll probably swing back to being more about the opportunity. I think comp will always be important, like a number 2, but it won't be number 1. And I think it's probably would move comp into like the 20% kind of range versus the 30 plus that it's in now. And it's kind of my hope, actually, honestly, because I think it's, look, it's not healthy when it's massively employer focused, but it's also not healthy when it's stuff that I tolerate in my office right now. Yeah.
Maybe just a follow-up question to that. When you were saying that comp was the highest reason why people were moving, do you remember what the number 2 and number 3 was? And is it related to the second last slide, which is like the total requirements that employer is offering?
Yeah, I think it was why they were leaving, you mean? Yeah. I don't know if I've got the stat on why they're leaving. I know that the other things that they're looking for were around job and then flexibility. Like those are the kind of the key things. But what's driving turnover? I don't know that I've got that offhand. Yeah, I mean I can tell you anecdotally what I'm seeing, but yeah.
Yeah, and so then to the second to last slide, we were talking about the total rewards and I think offered by the employer.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the employees feel the same way? That those offerings are what they need to be successful in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a really good question because like we did put on that, I think it was on this slide about personalized, right? And I think it's tricky in an organization to personalize packages for people, but I mean there are ways to kind of give them choice in it. I'm not. I think these are the from our research in terms of like what is important to employees at a macro level. These things are important, and they're how they connect with people is hugely important. I think that's why culture for me right now is an important topic because I think culture is about connectivity with people in the organization, and so if you don't have that, I think it does make for a not good work environment. So these are the sort of aspects we've seen. Whether that resonates completely for an individual, and how can you I think there's ways to accommodate some of these aspects. You can make choices about how you develop a working let's say a work schedule, but a flexible work environment for a flexible work arrangement for someone because that helps them, on the physical side. I do think they're looking for that, and that flexibility shows up across these kinds of dimensions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. One more question.
Yeah.
Do you see a role that ERGs played in this whole scenario?
Which
ERGs, like employee resource groups?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't seen them hugely, like people taking a lot of uptake in them. I would say, like, what we have seen is, like, I guess I would say this: getting smaller groups, whether it's an ERG or another kind of opportunity about getting people together in smaller groups and talking about well-being and sort of sharing experiences and strategies has worked effectively, and we have seen that be used in different organizations, whether they've formalized it or not. But I know that that certainly was something we were seeing a lot of use of in the pandemic, and I think it's kind of continued, and I think it does help to create that connectivity, like we're having to do things that we wouldn't normally have had to do to create that. So. But it's been more, I guess I would say it was more, less programmatically done and more done sort of in a, sort of more of a pop-up kind of thing where it was happening, not mandated by the company, but happening a little more naturally. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you develop a culture when you've got a hybrid type model?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of organizations are struggling with that now. So I'll give you a bunch of ideas, some of which will be useful and some will not. I do think from my perspective, I think figuring out at least some points to have people get together face to face is important. So whether you make that a social event people come to, whether you decide on an anchor day at work where everybody comes into the office. Those kinds of things I think are important in terms of maintaining culture. I also think being explicit about what your culture is and what are the behaviors that underlie it is important, because a lot of people, like if I look at even just my own team, like 30% or more of them were hired during COVID. They've never experienced kind of working together, which is sort of how your culture kind of gets established. So being deliberate about norms and behaviors and articulating those is important, because otherwise there's no way to, there's nothing to actually use as a touchstone to step back to. So I think that's important. I think the connecting employees with other employees that were in the organization for a while, whether that's buddies or counselors, however you kind of structure that, I think is important. And then I guess the last thing is just recognizing, so we have like a culture moment we do in our team meeting, and we sort of call out people who have represented kind of the culture and the behaviors that we want to recognize, and so that's the recognition piece I think is important as well. So a few ideas, but I think if you haven't defined it deliberately, it's very hard then to create something that isn't defined. Yeah.
Richard,
yeah.
In your environment today at EY, a lot of people are talking about how you're coming back to work. You covered a little bit of the stats, but what's EY doing, for example, in terms of bringing people back? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's, I say we have no policy because I went looking for that. Yeah, so what we've done, and so, if you know anything about a partnership, it's all about everybody being entrepreneurial and doing their own thing, right? So, so there's a lot of different ideas being tested. What I would say, a few things. So for our leaders, on our most recent partner call, our CEO across Canada, and this is like not his style, it was really interesting. He said, yeah, so we just went through the partner reviews for everybody across the country, and one of the things that came up was how often you're in the office. And people who weren't in the office, like that's a challenge. And we really expect you to be in 3 to 4 days. So yeah, exactly. Well, that was what happened. The surprise face. Yeah, that's. I mean, that was a lot of partners are like, just like the staff, are quite comfy in their couch at home, and so that's one thing, is leadership tone and message, right? So Jod was super clear on expectation on that, and so that's one thing. Our office managing partner who looks after Toronto has done a really, I think, a good job trying to create events for people to come to. So I don't know, and then it sounds excessive, but anyway, it's Jay's style. So he's got like this concert and whatever planned out at the docks in a couple weeks for everybody to come to, and they're gonna bus everybody down there and kind of connect people. He's done things, these are all superficial things, but they send subtle messages. He had like, a return to the office day, and there's like candy carts going around and other kind of stuff like that. So this is honestly, very creative man. and so there's that, and then I'd say, you know, what just to sort of bring it down to a team level, you know, it's been so interesting because some of the young people in the team are like, just tell us when you want us in, right? Just be like definitive, which I've kind of waffled on massively. And what I've said is like, you know, I expect you to kind of come in at least a day a week and be thoughtful and planful about how you use that time. Don't come in and like be on web calls all day. Come in, schedule meetings, connect with people, because what I again have seen is there's a barrier to coming in if you've never been back or never been in the office. And so without breaking that down, people just don't come. That I guess maybe the last thing is as we've you know, I talked about buddies, so we have people that are buddied up with everybody. Rather than doing a virtual coffee now, it's like they schedule time in the office for the buddy to come in to like walk them around the office because people haven't even necessarily been in the building, right? So it's all kinds of what I would say are small behavioral nudges to try and get folks in. Are we succeeding? Which should be the next question. I would say I think on, and I'm sure everyone's experienced this, like I think it's on Wednesday or Thursday, I don't know which day it is, but one of the days we have probably 80% or maybe it's 70% of the office like filled. Mondays and Fridays, it's like freaking ghost town. So, so anyway, small victories, but you know, we're getting some people back in.
One definition I've heard, which was really quite eloquent, is are you doing heads down or heads up work? Heads down work is one where you don't want to be interrupted by your colleagues and peers, and I'm sure, Richard, you can appreciate this. Yeah. You know, that's the last thing that you want. You're doing a proposal, you're getting an RFP out. You don't want to be interrupted by that good-mannered colleague who wants to invite you for a coffee. That's the work you do at home. Heads up work is teamwork, creatively based. You're in a room, you're trying to solve a problem together, and you need the energy and excitement around you. And for the organizations who are purposeful around those two dimensions, the level of resentment goes down because people don't feel like, I came all the way into the office to do what I could have done on my couch. Because I think that's the other component, is you bring them in, you say you have to be here on Wednesday, and they're like, to do what? Yeah. To do this thing where I don't want to talk to my colleagues. In fact, I actually resent being in here because I couldn't get done what I needed to. So yeah. Heads down or heads up, and then triage on that dimension. Yeah,
that's good. It made me think of something else that like we didn't talk about, just around technology, it was especially the heads down work, because I think a lot of our staff are coming in and they're on calls with clients and whatever, and the environment now becomes loud and hard to like concentrate and so on. So like we're very quickly trying to rethink sort of office layout and how that's going to work. We've managed to like redo all our meeting rooms so they can actually be hybrid now, which is good. But the actual space, because it used to be wide open cubicles and everything else, which it still is, which is like there's a point to that. It's now challenging.
I'd like to get your comment on, you said Monday and Friday is like a ghost town, right?
Yeah.
But I've heard some companies are saying it's a hybrid model, but you have to come in on a Monday or a Friday because the mentality is it's a long weekend. Yeah, yeah. And so they don't really work. Yeah. Can you comment on that?
Well, that was actually part of like what Jad said. Like, oh, and by the way, of those days you're here, it better be one of those too. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess this is, you know, it depends on the work that's being done. It depends on your culture. It depends how much you trust your employees, right? And you know, at the end of the day, you know, do I trust them less on Friday than I do on Wednesday? I'm not sure, right? Like I guess my sort of thought is, if you're willing to give them the, you know, the flexibility, and you kind of know what they need to get done, then do I care whether they're in on those 2 days or not? I don't know, but. You know, I can completely understand the struggle on that. I personally like to not be there on Friday, but for all the reasons you're mentioning. But
what about the youngsters getting promoted in terms of being hybrid? That's a huge issue too, right? For the young people, coaching, mentoring,
yes.
Getting promoted.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
yeah.
How do you?
I don't know. They don't seem to be scared to ask. That's for sure. They're ready or not. But. Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, the question was, what about young people who want to get promoted? How do we get them the mentorship experience, et cetera, to get promoted? In a hybrid model, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is where it goes back to the question on leadership capabilities, right? Because I think one of the things that does have to happen is much more deliberate connection with your people as a leader. And I would say also it puts a much more stronger onus on the employee to make sure they're having deliberate conversations and interactions with their leaders and with their colleagues. So I think it can work and they can get the experience, but there just has to be a level of deliberateness about it that just wasn't there before. And I think being clear to employees what they need to do differently and also managers is part of breaking that down.
I think it's really key that you make them feel valued.
Yeah.
Overlaying all of this.
Yeah.
That's the key in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't necessarily call it empathy, but yeah, it's in that spectrum of, yes, exactly, making sure that they feel that. And it's been interesting because we were just refreshing our strategy, and a few of my senior managers like, okay, well, how do we really connect this and make the employees feel part of it and valued in terms of how they can contribute to it. So I agree with your point. Yeah.
So in the mentorship, maybe you want to set up a Mentor Monday. Then they'll come in.
Yeah, there you go. 2 birds with 1 stone.
And then you could have Fun Friday.
Yeah.
My question is, so a lot of organizations are now thinking about real estate and hoteling. And so a lot of the research I've done is that hoteling doesn't really enable that culture building, and you can't bring in your personal stuff. You don't have to use a locker. So why am I going to truck down to downtown from Oakville if I've got a hotel and it doesn't have that personal feeling? Are you seeing that organizations are moving towards that trend, or are they going to keep the office space and hope to bring everybody back?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question because like the hoteling trend I think was really already accelerating pre-pandemic. So I know talking to one of the pension companies that fairly traditional, and they're moving into new office space, and they're trying to figure out, because they are going hoteling, like how do we make it compelling for people to come down when they don't have their spot. I would say I doubt. What I haven't seen is people walking away from hoteling, I guess I would say, is part of this. I think like the flexible use of space is going to increase, and it may have some impact on people sort of feeling like they have a place. But I do know of a few companies that moved to hoteling over the pandemic and immediately afterwards, and it probably took more change management and more communication, thinking about neighborhoods and all those kinds of things you've probably heard of before, right, where you have clusters of people that work together and kind of being really deliberate about that. I would not hotel and then say, hey, go find your seat and good luck, right? Like I think you do have to really architect the experience so that they do have the connectivity, even if they don't have the picture of their kids or whatever in the cubicle. Yeah, but I think flexibility, like from an organization perspective, is where it's going. Like it's going to be hard for people to have very fixed real estate when they don't know how it's going to end up being used at this point.
Maybe you have another question.
Yeah, sorry.
2 trends that I've been hearing and seeing that we didn't really discuss today is one, like a shortened work week, like a 4-day work week or so on, and then the other is a meatless day, right? Like no meeting.
Yeah.
Have you started to see that?
Yeah.
In engagements you're having with customers, love like your feedback, input?
Yeah, I've seen that. So I just like literally was at a dinner last night, and the company that organized it has just moved to a 4-day work week. They're starting as a trial between now and September, but they're a relatively small business. So in the bigger organizations, I haven't seen that. What I have seen is sort of more flexible work days, or like Fridays off in the summer, or those kinds of things, which are not necessarily new, but for some organizations didn't have it. So seeing shorter work weeks in the summer. There was something else in your question. There was the shorter work week, and what was the other? Thank you. Yes. Yeah. So like that I have definitely seen. There's some organizations that are doing like a meeting-free week after the long weekend kind of thing, and making it a week. Fridays being meeting-free. So I've seen more of that with larger organizations. The 4-day a week haven't seen that much. Like I have literally, because I saw it last night, but I'm not seeing it as a big trend at this point.
measuring productivity and success, and it's like every week over week is increased on those 2 days.
Really?
So, yeah.
Productivity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All output is always higher on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. You're not allowed to schedule an internal meeting, which
That's
is
amazing.
why I love it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Those are my favorite days of
Yeah.
the week now. Yeah.
So the point was there was Tuesdays and Thursdays were no internal meeting days, and they've, like, very good social experiment there. They've actually been tracking productivity over those days, and it's steadily increased on Tuesdays and Thursdays when they don't have internal meetings, which is a much larger question.
One day, because it was so productive, we added the second day.
Right.
About a month ago. So I think we'll probably keep that trend going.
Yeah.
Until we get to 4-day work weeks, which is, I know, a future thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Well, Rich, I want to thank you very much
Yep.
for joining us today.
Pleasure.
And sharing some of those facts with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. You didn't answer my questions, though,
Okay.
because we didn't get to what 6 months is going to look like.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I was trying to dodge that one.
We're going to help us all out in terms of, do we hire someone now or do we wait 6 months? You don't have to pay the wages.
Yeah.
One thing I did take away, a lot of great points, but I think one of the things that stuck with me that you talk about is being deliberate these days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you mentioned that you had your national partner on the phone, and you started fiddling through policies, trying to find, do we have any policies here? So what it feels like if we got leaders who are not necessarily leading today, they're actually just, everybody's scared about, okay, if I push too hard on this decision, I put it in writing and policy, I may lose 10% of my workforce tomorrow.
Yep.
But that's, I got to question that, because what do employees really want all the time when they ask you for clarity?
Yeah.
Right? So I would urge you all to think about being deliberate, maybe not having policies, but being very clear and communicating where it is that you're going and the expectations of your people. Maybe it is 3 days a week, maybe it's 2 days, maybe you require them to be. But I think you need to start making decisions, really. This flexibility, like I can tell in your tone it drives you crazy, and you're a partner at E&Y, right? So you can imagine how the employees underneath are feeling, and I think that's across the board. So I'm hoping everyone took something away from this today. I know it's a very dynamic thing. Some things are changing really rapidly. I know you're around, probably going to have a drink, so people can attack him with more questions.
Lots of drinks.
And then I hope to see you again. Our next Diet of the Exec will be sometime in September. And yes, I will do that too. Thank you. So we'll have one. Our next COE will be in September. Please check out, we've been running in between these live in-person events. We've been doing interviews online. So Fred Reichhold, for example, was the Bain partner who did the Net Promoter Score. Spent an hour with them about a month ago talking about Net Promoter Score, and it was actually unbelievable. So if you have a chance, listen to the podcast. We do that every other month. And I hope to see you all in September again. Now, before I let you depart, I have a big thank you for Boundaryless for having the courage to host us here today. Not all the big organizations today are opening up their facilities, so thank you very much. They've been very supportive. Focus Asset Management, Cleveland Clinic, E&Y, all great partners of PEO Leadership, just allowing us to make this happen and bring you all together. So thank you very much today. Enjoy the next hour of networking and have some drinks. And he's right here.